this also at the same time. There we go. While we were reading it, I've just been peering a little bit ahead. It gets a little bit deep. Not as if Tanya until now was so simple. It definitely is a lot to learn and a lot to digest. But as we're going through it, I really can't wait to get to chapter 26. Chapter 26 is really, it starts an entirely a very relevant and important analysis for our life of who we are using our Beinoni skills. So I may take the liberty after today's class, which is chapter 2021, for next Wednesday to jump a little bit, just skipping around 4 chapters, just to get to chapter 26. So skip, maybe I'll give you a little more of a summary and a synopsis of what's going on in the other chapters. But really, I'm excited to get to chapter 26. It's something I've been waiting for already many months. As we get there, it's really a hands-on approach to a Beinoni. We went through a hands-on approach in chapter 12 through chapter 17. And now what we've been discussing is this hidden love. And the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, now when we're talking about the hidden love, he's really dissecting it. He's really understanding the root of our soul and why it is that we just get used to the norm and kind of ignore or kind of get desensitized to important things around us. That's really what we've been discussing. I'll give a little more of a clarification and a summary, but what I'm trying to get to as we begin the class today is that I may take the liberty, and I'm just letting you know ahead, that we're going to skip a few chapters after this class and go to chapter 26. And now you may feel like, Rabbi, we're going so good. I'm telling you, once you see chapter 26, it's going to illuminate the whole hands-on approach, and I really want to press a button on us that gets us down to the practical of who we are. So that's just my little heads up before we begin. Okay, so what we know is just the flow of the chapters of where we are. And Browns, by the way, if you want, there is another copy of Tanya that is not being used in the shelf right behind you. So if you want, you could share. That's fine. There's an extra copy if you want to just grab from the shelf. Either one is fine. And and I should announce that you're welcome to also, based on your comfort zone, comfort level, but thank God, Marin and Novato particularly, I'm on the Novato emails with the city and the health departments. They are now allowing 50% indoor capacity for shuls, for religious organizations, which is really nice, really great. Obviously, we're doing it safe, we're taking it slow. So we have our Hebrew school open on Sundays, and we have our Tanya class on Wednesdays, and we have our Shabbos services that has just resumed on Shabbos. So you're welcome to come to those and join us in person. But don't worry, we're still keeping these classes on Zoom. So whether you're more comfortable in person or you're more comfortable on Zoom, either one is perfect for me, and choose at your comfort and safety levels. Okay. Where we are holding now is if you're looking in a book, it's going to be on chapter 20, page 235, section 3. And let's see, with Robin, do you confirm that? Could I get confirmation on that?
Yeah, I thought I was losing my job for a second. You're right.
Okay, good. Okay, good. All right, good. Just making sure. Thank you very much. But just a quick summary. We know what we're trying to get to is the fact that in our soul, we have in our bodies, we have a soul, and the soul, which we've already been introduced to in chapter 1. Now we're saying that there's a part of this that is called an ahava mesuteret. This soul has a dormant and hidden love, and this love is so real and deep that it can never be extinguished. It's always there, but at times it may be dormant. It becomes unconscious. At times it becomes a little weak and sleepy. But we have to know that it's in our soul. It's there. It just sometimes gets quiet. But in a time of crisis, it will pop up, which means if a person says, bow to this idol, renounce your Judaism, or this is your end, more often than not, a Jew, his soul within becomes strong, gets on fire, and he says, never will I ever be able to feel separated from God and do what you want to me, but I will never bow to the cross. I'll never give in. So what we're trying to figure out now, why does this fire of our soul, this love that's innate, why it doesn't pop up every day? Why is it only waiting for a time of crisis for it to pop up? But on your average Tuesday or Wednesday, it's not so sensitive to it, and it's not on fire, and it becomes desensitized to the point where it feels it could do things that are against God, and he doesn't bat an eye, he doesn't care. But now, when in the time of crisis, it pops up. Why can't this pop up every day? So what we're trying to get to is, how do we get it to remain on fire? How do we get that fire of the soul, that love that's innate and strong, to remain strong, not only during dangerous times, but all the time? So that's really where we were in chapter 20, is figuring out that we have a world and there's non-duality, which we've been becoming to mean that the world is not a separate identity than God. It's not that there's a God and there is a world that God created. It's and now the world is on its own. Every single aspect of world, of creation, of universe is actually one with God. It's actually God. There's nothing outside of God. It means everything in this world or in any other place is God. It's contained within God. There's nothing outside of God. Really, that's the meditation we're supposed to have when we say the Shema, when we say Hashem Echad. We're not just saying God is one and not two. We're saying every single part of our life and every single part of world and creation is actually one with God, which means it's all contained within God. If we really put that and understand that really there's nothing outside of God, all parts of this world is God, we'll acknowledge that everything we do is part of God. And anything that God asks us not to do that we do, or something that God said to do and we don't, is actually severing a relationship with God. So if we really put that on the front of our minds, that everything in life is part of God, and everything we do is connecting with God or disconnecting with God, God forbid, if that will keep our soul on fire. That it's not only in time of crisis, when our Judaism is on the line, that our soul should become strong, but in every aspect of life, every day, we have the opportunity to connect or to disconnect, God forbid. So the way we continue to analyze that is, and to understand this non-duality, we spoke about the power and actually, let's just start this way. We're going to be reading about the evolution of how speech comes about. In our process, the way we process things, it starts with the inner parts of our soul, which is the way we the way we intellectualize an idea. It's called Chachma, Bina, and Das. From there, it gets into our feelings, how we feel about it, about the idea. And there, we have to act on it. So the acting process, it continues to evolve through our thoughts. Then we speak about it, and then we act on it. That's the process. It's a 5-step process, from our mind to our heart, which has a feeling towards it. And then we figure it out. So we have our thought, how to get it, our speech, how to activate it, and then the action itself, the actual deed of doing it. So we're going to see the same is going to be with God's speech. God created the world with his speech. So we're going to try to be making that connection between the speech, the way we have it in our life, that the speech, the fact is, maybe your parents told you, as a kid, I was told, don't speak so much. I love talking. That's why I became a rabbi. They told me, don't speak so much because you only have a limited amount of words. They were trying to convince me to be quiet at times. So in school, they're like, no, you have to save your words for when you're older. But in truth, you could speak to no end, right? You could continue talking and talking and talking. And it doesn't really, you could get tired and then you have to breathe and you have to maybe rest, but you could just continue talking. You have really an infinite amount of words. But that speech is coming from a higher source, from the place of thought. And our thoughts are working a lot quicker than our speech can work. And our feelings, and then our intellectual capacities. So we're going to be trying to connect these and see how it works by us down here, and using that imagery of how it works by us, to how it also reflects in God's creation of the universe. Because when God created the universe, he created the universe with speech. So we're going to understand the speech of God and the creation of the universe, where it is in God's bigger picture, similar to the way words are to us. But how can we truly separate from Hashem? Everything is from So Yaakov, actually, it's a great question. I do want to address that. Yaakov's question he's asking in the chat is, how can we be disconnected from God? We're always connected. Everything is from God. We can never run away from God. We can never be disconnected. And you're actually right. And in most times within Chabad philosophy and just in general in Judaism, that's the angle that we actually mainly focus on, is that nothing you can do could ever sever your connection from God, and can never your relationship will never be off. Just like the DNA can never be removed from you, the godliness within you can never be escaped from you. That's actually correct. But at the same time, the action that we do that is against what God asks us to do is a sign that we don't care. Everything we're supposed to be doing is coming from love to God and with a sense of reverence. So just to take in a spousal relationship, obviously if your wife says to do something and you're like, I don't care, I'm not going to do it, you're showing that there's a lack of respect and commitment in that relationship. But doesn't make a difference what she asked you to do and what you said, I don't care. Meaning if she asks you to not do something very drastic, that she says this will end our relationship, and you do it anyway. So that's a lot more severe, right? But what happens if it's something petty? It's not really, she asks you to take out the garbage and you're like, nah, I'm not interested today. It's not that important. But by you saying, no, I don't care, obviously quality-wise, it makes a big difference in what degree. But ultimately, you saying, I don't care, whether it's a big request of your spouse or a small one, it's showing on some disconnect there. And the same is also in our relationship with God. Every mitzvah is not only the most severe, which God says to give up your life in a term of in times of idol worship, etc., that you feel I can't sever my relationship. Every mitzvah has the power to connect, and really every non-mitzvah, every sin has the power to some degree disconnect. Of course, the essence will always remain connected, but what you're showing is I don't care that much. So it's a different angle of what's usually spoken about. I agree with that. And we'll have to try to analyze that more. And Adrian, you're right. I haven't been in today or yesterday about the numbers in Marin, but I'm in touch with 3 doctors within the community that are experts and with the health department. And they were comfortable with us opening. So obviously we'll it's not a resolute commitment for the next 6 months. We're taking it week by week, like everything in life now. But right now it's safe enough to open. So we're happy to be open. All right, section 3. We're going to go now inside. Any questions before we dig in? Okay. Thomas, Shira, any questions? We're good? 2:35. I'm going to share my screen if that's helpful for anyone. And here we go. Okay. Section 3, an analogy of non-duality. And by the way, you could talk, you don't have to whisper in the back. It's all part of the class. It's nice to have some noise. So let's draw an example from the human psyche. We're going to understand from our human psyche how it works to understand and illustrate this point about explaining about God's creation of the world using a speech. The source of this example, which is in the Tanya's key illustration of the non-dual idea in this chapter and the next, it's from the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement. He was born in 1698. He died in 1760. He was the Alter Rebbe's teacher's teacher. So the Alter Rebbe was a student, a disciple of the Maggid of Mezrich. His name was Rabbi Dov Ber Friedman, and his teacher was the Baal Shem Tov. And spiritually, the Alter Rebbe considers his teacher, the Maggid, to be the preacher of Mezrich, to be his father, spiritual father, and he would refer to the Baal Shem Tov as a spiritual grandfather. And all the thoughts that we have in Chabad is coming based on the teachings from the Baal Shem Tov and other Kabbalistic masters. So here's the illustration from the Baal Shem Tov. When you say a word, that single word is utterly insignificant, even in comparison to the lower garment of the soul, the general power of speech, which of the soul's 3 garments, thought, speech, and action, it's a middle garment. A single word is insignificant compared to the soul's power of speech, since the power of speech can produce a never-ending, infinite stream of words. So of what significance is one word when compared with the power of speech that can produce words endlessly. So the Alter Rebbe, if I'm understanding here, is actually making 2 points. First of all, one word that a person says is insignificant in comparison to all the words he's saying over the course of his life. What is one sentence worth if you tally up all the words of his life? But even more so, the general power of the soul to speak is incomparably greater, and there's no comparison to the words that he's actually saying. A single word is utterly insignificant, not only compared to all the words that he's able to say, but in comparison to the power of speech that the human has. We know actually in the 4 kingdoms of inanimate objects, the vegetative kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human life, the human kingdom, which is us. In Hebrew, we're actually referred to as midaber. We're actually referred to as the speakers, because the gift of speech is saved for humanity. So yes, a parrot, you could teach them to repeat something, and you could have some extraordinary moment of poetic or speech of an animal. But for the most part, speech is a gift of the gift given to humanity. So, but in our power of speech that the soul has, the garment of speech, which is one of the 3 garments of the soul, the words that are actually coming out are nothing in comparison to the power, the potential of the soul to speak. So the words that are actually coming out a single word it pales in comparison to the power of speech that the garment of the soul has. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and we're going to get to there exactly. I think we touched on that last week also, and it's all gonna loop back to that. Exactly, meaning how God created the world was with his speech. And what we're trying to get to is, what is that speech worth in comparison to God's essence? Just like by us, the words that we say obviously have an effect and they are powerful, but there's a power of speech that is much greater, and the potential of his infinite stream of words, which is what we're saying, that he could speak endlessly. And so for the Brahms, I'm looking more on the screen just because I'm reading it from the screen, but tell me if I should make more eye contact. Well, have to get used to seeing people again. Perfect, all right. So all the more so is that one spoken word insignificant in comparison to higher levels of the psyche, such as the soul's innermost garment, thought, from which the spoken words are derived and powered. So listen to this and then we'll explain it. If one word is insignificant when compared with the power of speech, then certainly it is of no significance compared with the power of thought, which produces all the content that is later spoken. Where does our speech come from? It comes from thought. So if the Alter Rebbe is like building up his case over here. If we know that there's 3 garments of the soul, and this power of speech is the middle of the 3 garments, and the words, a single word uttered by the person is insignificant in comparison to all the words he's able to utter, and certainly insignificant to the power of speech that the soul has, that he could potentially speak with an endless stream of words. The single word he says, it pales in comparison to that broader power of speech of the soul. And if that's the case, certainly the single word he's uttering pales in comparison to the power of thought, which is the source that's higher than the power of speech. It's a garment above it, because the speech is coming from our thoughts. The thoughts produce the words. So the single word, could you put a word and say it's somewhat on the same level as the power of thought that he has? Of course not. You think so much quicker than how you could speak. That's how we think. You don't think, even though you have words that you're thinking about, but the way the words are coming in your mind and your thought is much quicker than they're actually the way they're coming out. So a single word pales and is insignificant in comparison to the power of thought, which is the garment above it, which is the source and the producer of the content that is spoken. And it goes without saying that a single word is insignificant in comparison with the soul's pre-linguistic deep core. Oh, I love these words, pre-linguistic. So you have the language part, which starts in thoughts, right? So it's a nice, the Alter Rebbe is going step by step, taking us through our soul. But what we know is even our thoughts, we think with words. If you want to know if a person, on Sunday we interviewed a few rabbis, from a rabbi from Morocco who I grew up with in Montreal, and a rabbi that's in the UAE, and his name is Rabbi Duchman. He actually just became official by Chabad, but he's been there for already a good chunk of years. Just had to be, he couldn't announce it yet, so they couldn't have a website up, and that would have been that would have been more dangerous. But now he's able to be official. Even the J Weekly, which is a local Bay Area Jewish newspaper, they actually wrote an article on our lecture that we did on Sunday about it. But you could speak many languages, like those rabbis. They're learning Arabic now. They speak 5, 6 languages. But there's one language that is what we say in Yiddish, our mameloshen, our mother tongue. And to know what language is the person's main language is whatever language they're thinking in. Right? A person could communicate fluently in several languages, but there's one language that is their main language, right? So Thomas, do you think in German or in English? Really? Always? Like since, oh. It would really? So that becomes your primary, that would become your primary. Like if you were. Because you have to. So even your thought would be in. Oh, interesting. Like my mother, her main language is French. So therefore, even when she's speaking English to us, sometimes she's automatically, like not automatically, but she doesn't realize that she switches to French. And, or we call it Yinglish, like a mixture of Yiddish and English. Like, sometimes you have these rabbis and they speak Hebrew, Yiddish, English, and they'll get up at the Chabad Rabbi Conference and they're like, okay, would you prefer I speak in Hebrew, in Yiddish, or in English? So people say, I want you to speak in English. So he starts his first sentence off in English, and then he just switches to Yiddish, but not purposely. It's just his mind is thinking that, and it just naturally comes out. It's a mishmash, exactly. So, but what we're saying here is that the power of thought is the one that produces the speech, and our words are already formulated in our thought. Already in our thought, we have the words that we're trying to get out. It's not yet formed, it's not yet spoken, but it's in our thoughts. But now there's a degree that's even above our thoughts, when it can't even be thought about yet because it's not firm yet. It's just a feeling. The feeling is gonna bring it up to allow you to think about it. You have a certain desire, a feeling, a want, and you start thinking about how you're gonna get it, right? So at that point, it's already being formulated. But before it gets into your thinking capacity, thinking about it, how to obtain it, it's just a feeling. It's really, when a person is unable to describe what they're feeling, is because it didn't yet make that, there's still that gap, and it didn't make that connection between the feeling to the thoughts, so therefore he can't express it. It's just a feeling. He could be excited, his lips could be, or his hands could be shaking with excitement or with nervousness, but he can't describe what he's feeling yet. Because to get the description, it needs to go from the thought, the thinking about it, into the speech. And when it's a feeling, it's not yet at that level. So there's a pre-linguistic core on the top of the Kindle page, 235, I think, in the book, which consists of the 10 powers mentioned above. Right? So the pre-linguistic, if you remember, we were learning about our soul powers, the 3 cognitive, which is Chachma, Bina, Das, the power of inquiry, cognition, and recognition. And then we had the 7 emotional faculties, which is the feeling of love and kindness, the feeling of justice, severity, and strength, the feeling of compassion and empathy. So those are 3 of the 7 feelings, but on those 10 soul power levels, which is the deep core, the inner soul, above the garments, there's not yet a language. There aren't yet, in the fancy English over here, there's no linguistic, I don't know how you would put that in a sentence, but it's the pre-linguistic stage. So Chachma, Bina, Das, since it is from these powers of the deep core that the letters constituting the thought are ultimately drawn and are subsequently expressed in the spoken word. The letters constituting the thought are right. So the thoughts have the letters of how they're expressing the feeling. So from there's words are formed in your mind, thinking, and then from there it's expressed in a spoken word. So even in a human being, we see the words of speech are utterly insignificant when compared to the higher powers of speech and thought, right? So you have the speech. This is the analogy that the Baal Shem Tov, that the Alter Rebbe is quoting here from the Baal Shem Tov, that our speech is insignificant to the higher powers of speech, and it's insignificant certainly to the power of thought, and certainly to the person himself in his deep core. The words that he speaks is insignificant. Apparently, then we can say the same of God's speech, through which the world was created and is sustained in existence, that it is of no significance compared with God himself. So this adds, let's see, what was the point of saying all this? This adds a further dimension of our non-dual understanding of the universe. In the previous section, we argued that the world has no independent existence since it is utterly reliant on God for its continuous existence. Here, the argument is taken a step further. Even the divine power that creates the world, God's speech, is of no significance compared to God himself. So just to wrap this all up with just a clarification, and because we learn only 1 hour a week, sometimes we lose the flow and the theme and the goal of where the Alter Rebbe is trying to get to. So just to wrap it all together, the Alter Rebbe in his agenda for chapter 20 is trying to explain non-duality, the non-dual Judaism. And the way he's making his case is the fact that without God's word creating the world would disappear. The whole creation of the world is coming through God's word. Like the beginning of creation, we reviewed this, I think, 2 weeks ago. As Shira mentioned before, God spoke and it came to be. By the word of God, the world came into existence. And as Shira mentioned before, it's not only originally, but every moment there's the utterance of God, the words that God used to create the world originally, those words are still sustaining the world. So that was one point, proving from there that the whole world is only coming from God's speech. So therefore, there's nothing outside of God, because if God would stop speaking these words, if those words would stop being contained within the creation, that whole identity, the whole world, that whole creation would be null and void. So the whole existence of world, which is coming from nothing, only from God's speech, to something, to a world, without God's existence, without God's speech in it, the whole world would go back to nothing, which proves to us that the whole world is contained within God. It's all from God and it all is God. But now the Alter Rebbe added a further point that even the world, the way it's being created from God's speech, it's only coming from God's speech, which is telling us that just like by us, our speech, a single word we utter is insignificant to all the speech we utter over our life. And certainly it's insignificant to the soul's power of speech that it could speak endlessly. A single word it pales in comparison. It's insignificant. And certainly the word he utters, a person would utter, is insignificant in comparison to the power of thought. Even though there are words in the thought, there are letters that he thinks, but it's so much higher than the way he's being expressed in speech. And certainly the speech would be insignificant, not only in comparison to the power of speech. And the words that he speaks is not only insignificant to the power of thought, which is above it, it's also certainly insignificant to the power of the soul, which is pre-linguistic, which doesn't even have words there. So the words he's uttering is insignificant to compare to the feeling, right? You could have a feeling and you're trying to express it, but the way I'm feeling it is much deeper than the way I could ever express it. It's much deeper inside the soul's feeling. So too also by God, what we're saying is a proof that there's non-duality, because even the words that God used to create the world, they're reliant on God. And that's number one, the point we were saying before. And the step further we're taking now is that the divine power that creates the world originally and continues to create it and give it existence, it's those words that God used to create the world, it has no significance to God himself. So therefore the whole world is contained within God. There's nothing in the world that is outside of God. It's all part of God. It's almost like insignificant in comparison to God's deeper, to God himself. Okay, any questions on that? I haven't been looking at the chat. I think we're good. So, yeah. Yeah. So as long as God is speaking to us, doesn't evolve. Yep. So that also means that nothing can just stay still.
to go one or the other. So as long as there's God's presence, it has to be moving forward.
Oh, interesting. So Thomas is saying, just like if you're saying that God's existence brings everything into the world, and without it, it would devolve into nothingness. So as long as the existence of God's word is involved in creation, it has to continue to evolve, it has to continue growing. I like that. That's good. It's a good thought. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you, Thomas. Section 4. Your soul has no words. So in section 3, which is the section we just concluded, Tanya described the deep core of the soul as pre-linguistic, right? We said that the power of the garment, which is the power of thought, speech, and action, is linguistic. There's words, the way it's being expressed, whether in actuality with speech, or even if it's just expressed, if it's just words, the pre-expression, the way it's just by you in your thoughts. But then we said that there's a deep core, which is the power of intellectual and the power of expression, the power of emotion that is beyond language, beyond words. We will now clarify this point further so as to gain a deeper understanding of the Baal Shem Tov's analogy of non-duality. So we would need to continue explaining that. Just in my mind, I would think, when you're thinking an idea, the chachma, there are words there that you're thinking with. So yeah, I guess let's use some more clarity here to understand it. Yeah, let's see further. Let's see how he clarifies it. So this is on 236 at the bottom of the book, or in the Kindle, we are all the way at the top. For in the garment of thought, in the garment of thought, there are also letters and words, like in the garment of speech. Only in thought, those letters are more intangible and subtle, right? The way we think, the letters that are there are much more subtle than the way it's coming out using our speech. But this is not the case within the deep core, in the 10 powers of Chachma, Bina, and Das, etc., which are the root and source of thought. These 10 powers reflect a psychic state prior to the emergence of letters. So that's the psychic state. I like those words. They are before the letters are emerging, before an idea or feeling takes expression in the garment of thought. The 10 powers of the deep core, which represent your intellectual and emotional energy, are the driving force behind what you think and say. But in the deep core, there are no actual letters or words. These only crystallize later in the garments of thought and speech. So that's a cool idea. When you have a feeling towards something, there's no words that you're feeling. The feelings only come out from the thought. Once the emotion produces you to the thought of how to obtain it, the thought about it, to fantasize on it, to think about it, then there's words that are being formalized or crystallized. But while it's in the seat of emotion, there's not yet any words, even though it's driving the thought, speech, and action. It's being driven and charged by the emotion, but it's not yet formed in words. For example, let's see the example. When a feeling of love or desire initially falls into your heart, before it rises from the heart to the brain to be contemplated, it doesn't have any tangible component, letters or words yet. It's just a plain desire and fervor of the heart for the thing that you crave. So that's a beautiful idea. There's love has to be expressed. You have to be able to communicate the love. And that's when it comes out in action, by buying a gift or whatever else to show your love, by communicating with words to express your love, and by thinking about how to communicate it. So you're thinking about this love. You have the capacity in your mind to think about it, how to express it with your speech, and then act on it with your hands and with your body. But before then, there's a pre-linguistic stage where the love is raw, where the love is pure, and it's a craving of the heart for this person. But at that point, it's not yet materialized, it's not yet tangible in a way of speech, in a way of words. So only there's a raw place where it's just the love, and then from there you produce the thought which has letters and words driving it, and the this expression of speech with your mouth. But there is the stage of the desire where it's just the thing that you crave without words expressing and clarifying it for you. Yeah, well, visceral meaning like that, that,
It's a physical.
so you're saying that physical body excitement.
Yeah,
So yeah, maybe I'm not sure yet because I'm thinking that also as I'm saying. Yeah. But you're saying that body reaction of yeah, yeah, right. But when you're saying you could feel it before you express it, you're saying you feel it in your heart or you feel it in your gut, you feel it in your body.
Well, we often have it. We often experience emotions.
Let me just see. Everyone, could you guys hear Thomas, or should I repeat what he's saying? You guys can hear him. Okay, fine. Yeah.
I'm trying to speak loud.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
You know, it would be a good idea for Thomas to bring a laptop or turn on his phone to do Zoom, even if he's there with you, because then he could be part of the group. He could see us and we can see him, because we can't hear him. We just hear. Yeah.
Right. So maybe I could get another video camera that could actually go that way. Yeah, I don't know how much internet.
However you
Yeah,
do it.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's not
Or
a
if
bad
he
idea.
turns on his iPhone, get on Zoom with his phone.
Okay. But so I'll just repeat what Thomas's point is, that if there's a stage of the raw, pure emotion of love or fear, whatever love a person's feeling, there's that immediate, I don't know if it's immediately, but before you can even express it, there's already that visceral reaction. There's already that reaction that you have. And he's trying to say that it seems like that's part of the raw emotion of it. And I'm not sure. We have to clarify that. And let's see. I take it to Josh line, right? That was from before. Hi, Tanya. Yeah, we are all safe over here. Thank you. A child feels before it talks, right? We all feel. Adrian, that's a good point. We all feel before we talk. And that's what we should do, right? If you talk without the feeling, it's not a good thing, right? You need that empathy first before you're gonna say something, and make sure it's coming from wisdom, right? You want a person. Okay, so let's see that more. Let's see more in the Tanya, if the Alter Rebbe himself clarifies it from the Baal Shem Tov, and then we could try to have a little more. So what we know so far is that there's a deep core, that while the feeling is still in the deep core, it is not yet tangible with words, neither in our thought, the way we are thinking about it, and certainly not yet in speech. For example, did we say this example yet? I think so. It's just, yeah, we did that. Okay, good. So the last paragraph on the Kindle of the page, and certainly there was no need for words or letters prior to the desire and craving for that thing falling into your heart. So what we're saying now is, even before you had a desire for it, there was the highest level of our soul is the way our intellect, our chachma, bina, and das. That's what produces the feeling towards something. So if in the feelings there is not yet any expression of words there, it's not yet able to be crystallized with a form and words, certainly the way it is before it came into desire, which is the way it is in our intellectual capacity, in our cognitive, in our chachma, bina, and our das, our inquiry about it, certainly there is no words yet crystallizing it. We have to clarify that, because I would think when you're thinking, there are words, so we have to see you're not thinking about it, you're thinking of it, and at that point there's no words yet. I have to clarify that myself. When your recognition of the thing as something desirable was merely in your chachma, your intellect and mind, i.e., when you were aware that this thing is pleasant and desirable, and that it's a good idea to acquire it and connect to it, whatever that thing might be, such as learning a particular subject or eating a particular delicacy, when you first know or feel that something is good, you haven't yet expressed that desire in words. You tasted some ice cream, it felt good. So when you see more ice cream, you want it. All that can take place without words or sentence. All that can take place without words or sentences forming in your mind. So I need to think of this idea, because I guess already just thinking of the idea, I'm already putting words there to try to clarify it. So we have to take a step back. When I want sushi, he's saying here ice cream, let's say sushi. in the mood of sushi this morning. So before it's actualizing the purchase of the sushi in the store. So there's steps. The final steps is going to the store and buying it. That's action. The step before it would be communicating, asking my wife, do you know where I could get sushi today? Or stopping someone in the street, do you know if the store is open? Then there's a thought about it. I really want sushi today because I need a good breakfast to get through the rest of my day, or because it tastes good and it's on sale today. So that's your thinking about it. But beyond that, there's also the feeling. I want sushi. But what he's saying here is that there's a step before that feeling. And that can take place without words forming in your mind.
Can it be completely physical, like you're salivating first?
I don't think so. So she was asking, is it a physical feeling? No, I think it's like salivating, or I think over here it's still all an intellectual thing. That this thing is good. It's a good idea to have. Or if it's a learning subject, it's something that will do good for me. I still have to clarify it. So let's see the next paragraph and see if it makes sense. And of course, if anyone has light to shed on it. So Robin is saying that it's like Helen Keller before she learned that the words exist. Okay. And Maddie says we can hear the words in our mind. So Maddie, you could hear the words, but that's actually in our thought. And here's where the Alter Rebbe is trying to separate, and I'm struggling to explain this, where there's difference between the words of our thoughts, and that you could hear, but the way it is in our mind, it's not yet into words. It's knowing something without crystallizing it into words. And that's where what I'm struggling on to explain. Right.
It has to somehow be connected back to your soul.
Right. Meaning it has to be relevant to what the drive behind it.
Because I think back on when I was in my teens.
Oh, and just to explain what Thomas is saying is that the speech and the thought have to be a drive of the soul. It has to be relevant and connected. It can't be its own thing, and that's part of the art of speech or a thought, is making sure it is in line with the feeling that you had, or with the of the intellect driving it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about teenagers, like teenagers know everything.
Right.
But you realize 20 years later that intellectually you kind of knew those things, but you didn't experience them until you experienced it and kept up with it. And it's only, that's kind of our connection with the soul.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's good. And Yaakov says, I believe the step before is almost instantaneous before your mind begins to clarify in words in your mind. Absolutely. By the way, the speed, to speak it, it takes time to get the words out and to express it. The speech in your thoughts is obviously much quicker. Before then, it's instantaneous. It's a feeling that when I feel something, I could have a reaction to it right away. It's just a reaction because it's so quick. A feeling towards something, it doesn't take time till you're able to produce something. It's able to be instantaneous. I like that. But I'm still not fully clear, so I'm going to continue on inside and see if the Alter Rebbe explains it. If not, I may have to think about this a little more to get the words and to crystallize it, as we said over here. It's only after the yearning and craving already fell into your heart that the thing is desirable, fueled by the recognition of your chachma, intellect and mind. So there is the chachma, which is our intellect and mind. That's the fuel behind the feeling, the yearning, the craving for something. Once you have that fuel, which is the intellect, and you have the way it's being expressed as a feeling, and that desire subsequently ascended from the heart to the brain to be pondered and contemplated upon, that's the thinking, how to actually carry out your desire, i.e. how to actually get hold of that food or acquire that knowledge. It is only at this point that letters must be born into your mind. It's only once you see the ice cream in the store window that you start to think to yourself, do I have enough money to buy this ice cream? How do I get into the store? It's only once you see the ice cream in the store window that you start thinking. So let's see. I may give the end of the chapter some words on its own, and then we'll try to clarify it ourselves. So if it's okay with everyone, I'm actually going to continue and try to sum it all up. But before I try to say my own thoughts on it, I'm going to try to read the Alter Rebbe's and see if it clarifies it. And again, what I'm struggling to explain is the thoughts and the speech is where the words are coming into play. Only there do you have an expression of our thinking about something. Are there words that are being crystallized? And certainly the way I'm speaking and expressing it with my words. But beyond that, the way it is in our feelings, it's not yet, it's pre-linguistic, which means it's not yet put into words. And certainly the way I'm thinking of it, which is our chachma, our intellect, over there he's saying there are no words that are tangible. So that's where I'm just struggling, and I'm still not fully clear on that. So we'll give the Alter Rebbe a few more paragraphs to clarify that. No, I mean both have. This is a set of the soul that are. The Shira's question is this pre-linguistic stage on the animal soul, and because you're not thinking. So really, the way we explained it is each soul. We have the godly soul and we have the animal soul. Each of them have their 10 soul powers, and each of them have their feelings, right? Each one of them has their cognitive faculties and their emotional faculties. So they're both trying to get control of the person's garments, but using their set of feelings and intellectual capacity towards it. So it's on both. The beauty, just if one thing maybe is not clear, I'm just going to explain this. The idea of not thinking, you're not supposed to act on it. The feeling is supposed to generate the thoughts towards it. The danger is when you jump the thought and you just go straight to the action without the thought and speech first. But this is the normal stage of how it works. The normal process would have to go through these 5 stages, from the chachma, which is the pondering of the idea, the inquiry of the idea, and then the feeling towards it. Once you have an inquiry and you recognize it, then you either love it, hate it, want it, or scared of it. And from there, you act on it by producing with your garments. How do I get it, or how do I make sure to avoid it? And then you communicate of it, and then you act on it. So those are the 5 5-step process in getting the ice cream or anything else. But what we're trying to say now is that the speech is a separate part than the soul itself. And that's what I still need to figure out. The soul itself is its feeling, and even higher is its cognitive, the way it inquires on the idea. At that stage, there are no words that are formed. It's only once from the feeling it goes to your thoughts of how to get it, how to obtain it, then there are words.
Right, the soul is pre-linguistic. I really like that. That says it all.
Yeah, and that's actually absolutely correct. And just why I'm struggling is because when there has to be a stage that the Alter Rebbe is speaking about, right, in our pre-linguistic, in our soul, which is the soul itself, that there's no words expressing and acting on it. So it's the feeling towards it that we can understand. You can have a feeling that's beyond words, but then there's also the inquiry of it. The chachma certainly doesn't have words. It's the highest stage of our soul that is pre-linguistic, and we just have to figure out how you could have that intellectual capacity that is beyond words, and there are no words yet being formed. So it's one of the bigger struggles that we've explained many months ago. Explaining the difference between the chachma, which is the inquiry, the cognition, and the recognition, which is the chachma bin and das, which is the way the soul is wired to think. Separate than the way we are, the garment of the soul, which is what we think about, how to actualize it, and forming the idea and communicating it with our thoughts to get into our speech and our action. But the highest of stages is the way we are intellectually wired to think. So not think about, but think of. Not it's not as a garment of our soul, but it's the intellectual capacity of the soul itself. And at that level, it's pre-linguistic. And I'm still not fully clear on how, meaning I think I get it, but again, I can't explain it. So yeah, sure. You know what, I'll even, I'll put it this way so everyone can see you.
Hi. Don't you have to answer the question a little bit, or ask the question a little bit about the purpose of the words? Is it just for intellectualism, or what? I mean, I have some ideas of what it would be, but what else? Why do we need the words to begin with?
How do
in your view?
So let me just.
It's not just intellectualism.
So I mean, you're saying we need the words.
We don't. I would argue that one of the reasons that we choose words in the first place to connect kind of what's in our soul is for connection to other souls. Right, and that's kind of that's where this body of literature and everything else comes from, the body of intellectualism that we see. So it seems like that kind of helps answer kind of what you were talking about.
Yeah. But it's
just
all
the purpose of the words to begin with.
Right, which is to connect with others, which is the connection of souls.
To connect with others, and that's why we write and we speak. And
right. So, but what you would say, Thomas, is if there was no others, if you were alone on an island, there would be no need for words or literature. Okay.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's actually going to be, I think, one of the main points he's saying here is speech is all about for others. And therefore, it's a very separate part for us, meaning our soul powers don't need speech to communicate to ourselves. Our soul power is beyond any words. And I think the way he's going to end this chapter is by saying that if God created the world using his speech, that's such an outside layer of God. It's so insignificant to God himself. That is the inner parts of God that is beyond, it's the soul, like our soul power. It's beyond any powers of communication or speech. Let's see that inside. Thank you, Thomas. Hold on one second. Okay. We're on the top of the next page on the Kindle. These letters of thought, being of each nation in their language. That's a quote from Queen Esther. Actually, it's Esther didn't say it. It's in the book of Esther, but there was a decree of the king Ahasuerus, his name was, and he was the ruler of 127 countries. So each nation, each country of under his kingdom, he put into their words that actually his word was he killed his queen Vashti at the time when he was drunk. A lot of crazy stories, but we're not going to get into the story for him. But that's an expression. He's just quoting a verse to tell us that these letters of thought, being of each nation in their language, in which they speak and contemplate all worldly things. Unlike the feelings of the heart, which has a universal language of unarticulated desire. So the feelings of the heart has a universal language. It's unarticulated desire. Let me just see that in the Hebrew if I can understand it a little better. Hold on one second, everyone. Let me see where we are. I don't think I understand the last paragraph. These letters of thought, being of each nation in their language, in which they speak and contemplate all worldly things, unlike the feelings of the heart, which has a universal language. I like that idea of a universal language, but that's the feelings of the heart. So, so the feelings of the heart, I'm just trying to understand these words. Feelings of the heart have a universal language, but the feelings of the nations, that's different, each nation to their language. Then it's more communicated differently, but then there's a step beyond that, which is unarticulated desire, that is a universal language of the feeling. I'm still struggling on the words. Let's see where the Alter Rebbe goes. This analysis offers us an even deeper insight into the non-existence of the world as a separate entity from God, right? The whole point of this chapter was to explain God's non-duality, where nothing in the world is separate from God. Everything is contained within God. So in section 3, we argued on a quantitative basis that words are of no value compared to the power of speech, the powers of speech and thought, right? We said that words are insignificant. The power of speech can produce an infinite number of words, and the power of thought can produce an infinite number of ideas to talk about. So quantitatively speaking, one spoken word is null and void compared to the powers and that create speech and thought. But in this passage, we have added a qualitative dimension to the voiding of the world's existence, arguing that in the deep core, there are no letters or words. Like in our soul, in our deep core of our soul. While one word may be infinitely insignificant to the powers of speech and thought, the comparison still makes sense. But how can you even begin to measure words in relation to the deep core where there are no words? God's word then is both quantitatively and qualitatively null and void compared to God himself. And if that is the case, the universe whose existence is sustained by God's word is certainly null and void. We can therefore affirm that, and I think this is a quote from section 2, this was a quote from one of the Kabbalistic masters, that neither the creation of this world, something from nothing, nor the creation of all the spiritual worlds brought about any change in God's non-duality. And just as he was the only singular and exclusive existence before the physical and spiritual worlds were created, so too he remains the only singular and exclusive existence after he created them. And so I'm going to go back to the previous screen because there's obviously some heavy duty words, but what we're trying to explain is both in quantity and in quality, the speech of God's creation of the world through God's speech is insignificant to God himself. So therefore, the whole world, which came about by God's speech, is totally null and void to God. So therefore, it's all contained within God. And hence, that's proving God's non-duality. The whole world is insignificant to God, and therefore it's all contained within God. So even though there is a world, and we can't fool ourselves and think that the world is non-existent, and therefore I don't need a job and I don't need to put food in my mouth because it's all nothing anyway. No, there is a world, but don't think the world is different than God. Don't think the world is outside of God, and don't think God changed after creating the world, because that's a pretty intimidating project to create a whole world and all the complications that go on in the world. It didn't change anything in God. Just like by us, a person can speak, and the power of speech doesn't change the person himself, right? He could speak and speak and speak, and you could read anything, but it doesn't change who you are. So too also, and they're all insignificant to the soul, to the person, to the deep core. So to also God's creation of world using his speech didn't make any change in God. They all remain null and void in comparison, which means they're all contained within God. And therefore, this proves to us this pretty long thesis of non-duality of God. And just to jump a little bit ahead, I think the point of where we're trying to get to it is, therefore, if everything is insignificant in comparison to God, everything is God. Everything we do in the world is part of God. And therefore, you're either deepening your connection with God, or you're making it more fragile and severing it. I think that's going to be one of the main points. I'm just going to read these practical lessons. I think also I skipped so it's going to, you know what, I'll read all the practical lessons, and that will also take us back in the book to one that I just skipped over. Every mitzvah is in essence either an affirmation of the one God or a repudiation. I like that word, a repudiation of idol worship. Right? Every mitzvah we do, it's not only when you're saying, I'm not going to serve idols, or I'm going to read the Torah today. That's not the only time you're showing your oneness with God, or your refusal of idol worship. It's in truth, every mitzvah we do is part of that oneness of God. Right? Like we said, all the mitzvahs are included in the first two commandments, positive and negative. So in the Hasidic paradigm, believing in one God doesn't just mean you reject the notion of other gods. In Hasidic understanding, believing in one God means you appreciate that God is non-dual. There is no independent existence outside of God. If you were scared because of another person, and you're almost feeling subjugated to them, or you love that, or if you take Hollywood, right? We idolize people, actors. What you're doing at that point is you're rejecting. It's almost like saying there's a significant other, there's something else outside of God. There's an independent existence, and that's a dangerous place. If you're worshiping money or worshiping a job or worshiping a person, what you're saying, what you're in essence saying, is that there's something independent of God, and therefore this scares me. But if you were to really meditate on the idea that really it's all from God, and it's all part of God, and the whole world is coming into existence from God, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a change in God, and ultimately, God, it's all contained within God, and therefore you have to connect with God. It's not true that the world doesn't exist at all. It just doesn't exist outside God. If you were God, you wouldn't see a separate world. You would just see yourself. And we went through these last week, and I really enjoyed that last line. If you were God, you wouldn't see a separate world. All you would see is yourself. So I think that's how God sees the world. God doesn't see the world as something outside. God sees the world as itself. It's God himself. And finally, this last one we didn't read yet in previous days. The voiding of the world's existence occurs on two different levels. The world has no independent existence because, one, it's dependent on a divine power, God's speech, for its continued existence. And two, that divine power itself is utterly insignificant compared to God himself. A lot to digest here. This is really nice. I'm just going to go backwards here. So non-duality. How should we view Muslims, Christians, and others of a different faith in Judaism? Of Judaism. Okay, so I'm over time here. I'm actually going to save your questions. And if it's okay with everyone, I actually have to run, but I will. That was fun. All right, a lot to digest here. I will answer these questions next week. But for now, I'm leaving you guys hanging a little bit. I just have another meeting I have to run to. Wow, good Tanya stuff. All right, so everyone, next week, God willing, I'll give a strong review on this and get to chapter 26, hopefully, because that's really where the meat and bones of what we're trying to study is. Everyone have a great week. Thank you all, and look at the world as a non-dual existence. It's all part of God. Everything we do in the world is God. All right, bye, everyone.
Thank you.